I will get everything started for everyone. I'm sure some other people are going to end up trickling their way in. So I'm just going to start with some introductory stuff now, and we will go from there. So thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to just listen in. Um, you know, you can engage as much or as little as you'd like. If you just want to kind of listen and hang out, please do. If you want to use any of our chat or Q&A options, please do. I usually recommend if you want to use chat, that's just for kind of random comments, information sharing. When you open your chat, you can see that you can probably send it to host and panelist, which would be myself, a Pineapple support, or everyone, if you want everyone to see what you're sharing. Q&A, I would say I encourage that if you have a question specifically for me, something you want me to address, highlight, or share. That kind of lets me, it's almost like a cue. It's like I can see it, and then if there's a time in it where I'm kind of on that topic, I could just make it seamlessly go right in. Of course, there'll be time at the end if there's anything that you want to share or ask. But first of all, I am Rainier. I keep my name kind of a little bit of both on here because some people have known me as Rachael. I'm really fine with either, but I am a licensed mental health counselor based out of Florida. I've been working alongside Pineapple Support and with them for, I think it's 3 years. It's probably more because who really knows what time is at this point? It's confusing. So I really think that that's actually false. I think it's been probably more than that. So anyways, what we'll be talking about today is hyperindependence. This is a really nuanced topic, so I will try to hit on some of the highlights, but I definitely encourage any participation, curiosities. Please don't ever be afraid or nervous to share something in the chat or Q&A. To me, timing does not matter. So if you're like, oh, should I say this now? Is it awkward? Is it weird? Is my timing off? I don't believe that at all. Just kind of let me take care of that. Like I said, if you don't want to share anything, that's fine as well. So in my work, I am mostly work with trauma. I specialize in, CPTSD, dissociative conditions, working with the adult industry, LGBT folks, specifically trans folks, autism, any neurodivergency, quite a wide variety of things. So this is something I see a lot, hyperindependence. So first, we're going to run down some definitions. What are we talking about? I mean, it kind of is what it sounds like, right? Hyperindependence. Independence gone too far. So first looking at that, I always like to share where these kind of concepts come from culturally. So I will every so often share my screen with you so you can see and see my bajillion tabs. I'm sure that's very enjoyable for everyone. But first, we're going to start with looking at what is individualism. I mean, it sounds pretty straightforward, but basically, these things that are desired are typically going to be a sense of uniqueness, standing out from the crowd in some sort of way, being able to adorn, look, act, and have interest in whatever's important to you. Self-sufficiency, taking care of yourself, doing your what we call activities of daily living, feeding yourself, paying your bills, clothing yourself, taking care of things, going to work, whatever the case may be. Independence, which obviously I feel like really kind of draws upon the self-sufficiency thing, although independence can mean a lot of things, kind of scaled to your ability level. And then autonomy. That is really just the right of oneself to make your own decisions about what you want to do, what you don't want to do, and everything else in between. So autonomy is a kind of an ethical, philosophical concept about that we all have the right to make our own choices at the end of the day about what we want to do. We have the right to decline or do things that feel right for us. and all of that. And then we'll go ahead and take a look over at collectivist, kind of what, a lot of non-westernized countries and even some westernized countries have going on. So collectivist culture and care really focuses on selflessness. So putting others before oneself, or I like to think of alongside oneself. You're still trying to care for you. However, depending on the culture, sometimes certain groups may come first, like children, elders, etc. Maybe spiritual or religious figures working as a group to figure things out, to care for each other, to uphold each other, doing what's best for society. So outside of kind of the microcosm or little community that may be local or within your home, it goes outside of that to the larger country, world, otherwise. Families and communities are central. It is about kind of giving back and this constant momentum of energy kind of flowing around to all different people to ensure that the community can be healthy, happy, and sustainable. So I think we're probably seeing quite a difference here when it comes to hyper independence, right? Like that doesn't have a lot of group work, putting others before ourselves, certain values and traits that we saw of the collectivist cultures. Usually there's this concept of, autonomy is number one, my independence comes first, and that is what's going to be my priority. So there's a couple things that we'll break down from that, which is, where does this come from? Well, first, I think if you're in a more westernized country or that has influences of that, individualism is really promoted. And that's something that we see, in content that we watch, movies, art. That's why I'm a big fan of media literacy, right? Is because we can see what's being recommended there. People striking out on their own, the story of people going out to maybe LA, New York, or Europe, and they're like, my family will deal. I need to go follow my dream. And that's kind of just a small example of that. Other examples of more individualism are, saying, well, I really care about going to this college or this, writer's retreat or this tech school or whatever, even if it's miles or states away. That's what I need to do. Whereas someone in a collectivist culture might never consider that and just think, gotta be close to the home. That's, I'll make do and I'll find some other ways to express my individualism. So individualism is a really beautiful thing, especially for those of us who have never felt really important, listened to, or those that didn't get a chance to define themselves at all, right? Because that happens too. Or maybe we were raised and we just had to follow along. We had somebody kind of dressing us in a certain way or insinuating how we needed to look, act, be, believe. There's a lot, right? A lot of people have discussed, oh, my parents want me to go to school for this, or my parents do not want me to be in that line of work. They frown heavily upon that. They want my hair to look this way, my friends to look like this, me to do this, me to have a child, me not to have a child, whatever. And I think that's where individualism is important. We don't want to be so heavily defined by others, especially if we've not had the chance to actually explore and look inwards, right? If we've gotten that chance to look inwards, it's really kind of a fascinating thing to be able to figure out, like, oh, maybe I finally have room to figure this out. I work with a lot of people that are late in life coming out, or learning some really big pieces of information about themselves. And I always hearken that back to, they weren't allowed to have any sense of individualism. So I'm not saying either or is the right answer, but can we have a balance? Now, hyper-independence. That is when it goes too far in a black or white thing. You know, um, need kind of needing or more, I don't really like to use this word, codependency. Like I must have others. I cannot possibly survive without others. Um, and what I mean by that is more emotionally. Like I can't have a moment alone. I can't go, do anything, which I get. There's a lot of nuance there too. Some people are dealing with agoraphobia, anxiety, and we kind of want our comfort person with us, but I'm using kind of broad strokes here. The other side of that is the hyperindependence. What you'll usually see in somebody with hyperindependence is a lot of isolation, staying home alone, or doing a lot of activities by oneself, keeping their cards close to their chest, so to say. There may be times where if a friend or family member does check in, that they they realize, oh, whoa, like didn't know that. The hyper independent person will essentially kind of drop some big information that the friend in question would think, oh, you'd probably tell a friend about this, right? And it's like, no, oh, I got a surgery, or oh, I came out, or I switched jobs, or yeah, I moved halfway across the country. And they're like, oh, the hyper independent person doesn't even think that, like, oh, maybe these are things I could, or would talk about with somebody. Not that we owe it, but that, it's a fairly average thing to do, to share that information. You can also see a lot of substance abuse and suicidality, because essentially what we have is somebody who there's no real like accountability partner, right? When we have friends or family, they might look at our place or make an observation and be like, hey, I think I'm seeing something that I don't know if you see. And then we can choose if we want to take their help and move forward with that. Um, but we don't have that accountability, in hyper independence. We can do whatever we want in our house, which can be self-harming or dysfunctional or just downright not helpful behaviors to us. And we don't have anyone to question it. And that's kind of part of the interesting aspect of it. It's like, well, I don't have anyone to tell me what to do, and I kind of like that, and that kind of draws me to it. So you can see a lot of those things, like any substances, what we call process addictions, which are more behavioral, like gambling, shopping, etc., where essentially somebody goes unmonitored, for lack of a better word. You'll see somebody that may be kind of defensive if somebody offers help, or is even just giving to the person in general. Sometimes a person who's hyper independent will kind of be offended by that and think like, hey, I don't need anyone, leave me alone. I got it. I got the hang of it. I'm good. And many times kindness, warmth, giving will be interpreted as like charity or pity, and that is super disgusting to the hyper independent person and a lot of just people, right? I don't think that's a desired feeling, right? Um, is dealing with that. We don't want that. No one really enjoys those experiences. Um, so other things that you might also notice are kind of avoidance, just avoidance of anything. You invite someone somewhere, maybe you'll get ghosted, or they won't reply. They just don't want to hear anything about it. Um, and I could go on and on and on and on. And sometimes, if If this reminds you of yourself, just know we're here to kind of break this down, not to judge this or to force behavior into something else. If you're hearing this about somebody you know, it's just something to think about. Because a lot of times hyper-independent folks, this didn't just come out of nowhere. I think that's an important thing to think about, is most people don't just wake up one day and go, yeah, people aren't reliable. They kind of suck. I'm done with it. No. It's usually after a series of things have happened, or one thing in particular has happened. And this often goes back to some sort of expectation in childhood, adolescence, or early adulthood. And it can come from either side. Somebody that has kind of been over, maybe smothered, helicopter parent, whatever words we might want to use, may go with that and desire more of the same, or they may completely reject it and be ready to take a breath of fresh air. And most of the time, as humans, we're not great at course correcting. When we do course correct, we tend to put the needle to the other side. So now we have somebody going to hyperindependence. Other times, people will have been forced into hyperindependence, and will just be so used to it. I'm not going to use so much comfortable as familiar with it, that they're just like, yeah, I'm okay here. I can just hang with this. It's fine. Um, and start to believe that my way is best. I'm the one who knows how to do it. I'm the one who's going to get it done in the way that I know how. I want other people to leave it alone. When it comes to emotional care, will probably be more used to things in like a dissociative response. If you're not familiar with what that means, it essentially, well, first, dissociation's a spectrum. I'll see if I can pull up a little picture of it. I didn't think of even mentioning this, so that's why I don't have my picture. But I will pull it up so we can just have a little, here we go, have a little look-see at it. All right, oops, I just noticed that there's a Q&A question. I'll take a look at that in 1 second. So here's a dissociative spectrum. Everyone dissociates, one. Now, there's a clinical level, and then there's not. So kind of like halfway between mild and moderate is going to be that clinical level. So all of us do things, well, I don't want to say all of us, but generally most people do things like highway hypnosis. Oops, I don't remember taking all the turns it took to get to this house, but I know I'm here and I know I was safe about it. Spacing out, daydreaming. Then eventually we start getting to places where we're losing a little bit of time. Or when we're talking to somebody, we're kind of like, who is that? Like, I know, but like, why is this conversation happening right now? Like, almost the visual that I always give is feeling like, if you've seen like cartoons or movies where like a ghost is like right a foot above the body of someone, like that. Like, it's just not quite meshing. So a lot of hyper independent folks can have a little bit of a dissociative just way of existing. They often may have been used to like a silent treatment, just being ignored, having to be the wallflower. And it's just easier to move through life, just kind of packing things in, not really digesting it. That's why we use the lovely term emotional constipation. Sorry for that one, but thought it was quite fitting. Okay. So someone anonymously said, trying to unlearn being hyper independent is hard. Accepting that I am not a burden for asking for help is hard. I'm always able to help others, but reteaching myself I deserve the same has been a journey. Yes, most definitely, this is a journey. It's very difficult because we're in a society that It's kind of the bootstraps mentality. Pick yourself up, figure it out. That doesn't often work without some of the support of others. And that never means that we couldn't possibly do it by ourselves. But one of my favorite questions I always ask all my clients is, there's a real big difference between could and should. You could do it. You could get it done alone. You could grind it out. Should you? Most of the time it's like a no, because why? Like there's no, usually we can't come up with a reason of like, I must because usually, we find ourselves a little bit lost there. And that burdensome feeling goes so deep. That's a big part of hyperindependence, is if you're ever made to feel like a burden, um, you know, and I'm kind of trailing around. That's kind of my style sometimes. But if you're familiar with attachment theory, there's secure attachment and insecure attachment. Secure attachment is really nice. It's I know that I will be fed, attended to, helped within a reasonable amount of time. And this is usually something in childhood. We know that our cries, our babbling will receive help. We won't be expected to, quote, cry it out, deal, cope, figure it out, which is not appropriate for a child because they're not going to do that, because how would they do that if they don't know? And then there's insecure attachment, which can go from all across the spectrum to disorganized types, avoidant, anxious, you know. And a lot of times what people don't realize is that these attachments, when we're given these examples, it's usually like these scary examples of like, my parents came home late or never, and I couldn't rely on them, or I was being actively, harmed, or I was being ignored, abused, neglected in some way. What we forget is that sometimes parents can be okay, but we witness them going through a lot. Not so much I'm seeing them go through something as in I see them go through an event, but how your parent interacts with you. If every time you try to approach a parent, they're like grimacing, looking uncomfortable, flinching, on edge, kind of furtively looking around, or they're flustered, they're, talking, yelling, throwing their hands up in the air and mumbling to themselves. After a while, a child, an adolescent is going to learn now's not the time. And then now's not the time becomes now's never the time. There is never a time to ask for support, to ask a question, even simple things. It becomes all across the board. I may as well forget it. Because many times if you do dare to interrupt, or if you receive a response where the person's like kind of split attention, or like, okay, like what happened? How can I help you? What? If you've heard that one before. Many times people will ask, get a kind of crappy response. Like I can't think about that right now. I just can't do it. This is too much. It's too much. I don't need anything else on my plate. You get kind of shut down. Then maybe you do try again. And then somebody's like, what? What do you want? Nothing. And eventually they just stop asking. So those are often sometimes some of the roots of things. Is it's not so much just always this horribly abusive, family or parent, but sometimes just living with parents that, had a lot of unmasked stuff going on, or were kind of preoccupied. This is not to shame those people for existing or showing symptoms, but in how the approach transitioned over to the child or adolescent. So I very much appreciate you bringing up that burdensome feeling, because It's a really difficult one to get past because we were often taught that our behavior influences others. So if I ask a question, I bother somebody, I'm annoying, I'm interrupting their day. When if we were able to reverse all the way back to our brain pre trauma, dysfunction, difficulty, we would know people are responsible for their actions. So if you say, hey, bud, I hate to ask, but I really, could use your listening ear this evening, or I'm going to need help moving in 2 months. Do you think there's any way that I could nab you for a couple hours? Whatever the request is. Um, it's we kind of forget that the other person can say whatever they want. Just because we ask doesn't mean they have to say, yes, I must. And now I resent, which is what we tend to think. Like, I asked this question and now the tally has begun. Now I'm going to have to give back to them to even it out. Because many times that conditional love and care is what we received at some point in our life. Like, I must even out the playing field. When healthy relationships, I'm going to kind of use a visual with my hands here, they look kind of like this, which if you can't see, my hands are just moving kind of facing each other up and down, but not too far away. You pass between that point that you meet each other at, because most of the time in life, someone's going to need a little bit more while another person might need a little bit less. Then that may switch. Sometimes it might be close to being, at the same, but we never want it stuck. So I'm not saying that like we never give back to our friends, but we never want it stuck, or one person feels constantly used and one person feels, they're constantly asking, the other way around. So usually in that trying to fix the burdensome thing, we're like, I don't even want the chance for anyone to think that. So I'll get you back. I'll get you back. And it almost becomes like pathological, which I hate using that word, but it's like, gotta get them back. Oh shit, they borrowed money, or I borrowed money from them. I gotta get them back like tomorrow. And it's like in such extreme stress too. It's not just like, okay, like I need to get back to them. I will have my paycheck this week. It's like, I will take out a payday loan to get you back because I do not want to burden you. And people can always say to us, no, no, thank you, not right now, maybe next time, sure, yes. And if they do hold resentment over their acceptance of aiding you, that has to be on them. If we're asking in a very kind, open way, that's all we can do. Say, hey, no pressure, but I could really use your help. Yes, I would be happy to help. And it's hard for us also to, as hyper-independent people, it's hard to accept that people could want to do something without that running tally too. To realize that like maybe they're not keeping tabs. Maybe they're just generous in spirit when we've been raised around a lot of people that maybe we're conditional, as in what I mean by conditional is I like you when you do something that I like you to do, or when you please me, or when I find it acceptable. Whereas unconditional love and care and support is I love you, like you, and support you, even when you may not be making a decision I would make. You're making a decision I'm unhappy that you've made. I don't agree with you. I still care, and I will talk to you, hear you out, and support you. There just may be boundaries or lines that I have drawn. That's so conditional care is often about performing. And that's where we tend to step up as hyper independent people. It's like, okay, fine. I'll do the thing. And another thing to talk about is that some of us, I kind of mentioned it briefly earlier, is that some of us find comfort in hyperindependence. I think part of it is because of that lack of accountability, the reclaiming of if we ever had somebody way taking over our life, um, just kind of over directing us and all of that stuff. Um, we're ready to reclaim. We're done. We're done with requests and desires. We're like, I'm done. But then we often get so far out of our community in a belief that there could be anything useful there. Once in a while, and again, I say this in all kindness, once in a while, a hyper independent person can end up almost self absorbed, I guess. And what I mean by that is kind of the my way or the highway, I know best, no one is trustworthy or good but me. Kind of how I've thought of and described of depression as kind of feeling self-absorbed. And what I mean by that is not in the literal sense that we use self-absorbed, but in a very, I guess, more of the essence of it. Whereas in depression, we're more like, I'm bad. I'm not good enough. They said that to me because they don't like me. No one likes me. No one understands me. The world has it out for me. I think we're noticing if we said those things with a positive twist, we'd probably be like, wow, a bit of an ego. The world loves you and is always ready to accept you, and everyone is noticing you, Right. So I think hyper independence can go the way of self absorption, and that's especially when it becomes a bit troublesome, is like we kind of lose touch, and what we really lose is perspective. Um, I don't think that, we don't have our own internal wisdom. I think that we do, and there's a lot to it, and we want to respect it, especially if we've tried to reclaim it. But we don't get a chance to be accepted. And that's why when I work with people on trauma, I call the social aspect the final frontier of healing. Because we got to take all the coping, the trauma processing, all of that, and then apply it to, I need to people. I need to do some peopling. And I would maybe turn down the volume on the need. Because I know sometimes us hyper independent folks, when we hear I need people, we're like going to start hissing and growling and being like, oh, no, thank you. I don't want any of that. But to a degree, yes, we are human beings. As much as we, would like to think that we're, built different as hyper independent people, we are still humans, and we do get something out of unconditional support, differentiation and perspective, to kind of help us get out of the bubble that we've been in, because usually it's a protective bubble. Once the wounds have healed, close to healed enough for now, we don't need that big protective bubble. Maybe we need a couple band-aids, maybe we need a cast, but we don't need to be Bubble Boy anymore. But we keep ourselves there because we're like, this is what I know now. And we forget that there are people out there that are ready to support us and accept us. And we are not just at the whim of people. Because sometimes we think, well, people out there aren't safe. They won't know better than me. I don't want to. I don't like it. They have nothing to offer me. But what if they do? Or maybe it's about what you have to offer too. And we don't get a chance to see that when we're in our echo chamber, where we're just basically talking to ourselves or people that live similarly or don't challenge us on it. But it's basically a safety mechanism to keep ourselves from being accepted, vulnerable, soft, gentle, And that might all sound gross and awful and disgusting to you, but I promise there is something to it. Um, it can be that last leg of recovery to know that in some aspect, vulnerability, when I say that, you might think of different things, people, emotions. I'm keeping it vague here because a lot can be vulnerable, is to have somebody accept you in your vulnerability and know nothing I've lived through, done, feel is worthy of shame. Because we often let shame take over, and that's why we use a lot of our hedging words like sorry, no pressure, hope it's okay with you, you don't have to, sorry if I'm bothering you, sorry I'm so annoying. It's like, what are we saying sorry for? Existing? Or what we're asking? Sometimes it sounds like we're saying sorry I exist and could even dare to ask you for help or a question. So I think that there's ways to go about doing this, which I always recommend to people. Go exist somewhere that you care about. Maybe you really love books and you find a library safe. Exist there. Maybe you like coffee shops. Maybe you want to take it a little further and go to something like a peer support, not so much a support group, but just people who relate on a topic. And you just want to exist there. You don't talk, you don't ask, you don't say anything, but you just observe that there can be human interactions that are plentiful, useful, helpful, boundaried, appropriate. And it's okay if you're unsure. And it's okay if you walk away and you go, that was a bunch of BS. Keep looking and remind yourself that, like, sometimes it's a different version of ourselves. And I know that sounds like I'm going off on a thing, but I believe that we kind of have parts, and I don't mean like DID, dissociative identity disorder, although some people with that would describe themselves as having parts. But more so that at different varieties of times in our life, like maybe when we were 10, 12, 16, 18, 22, whatever, um, we had something going on and we had kind of a usual mood or behavior that we engaged in. For me, a strong part of mine is my 16-year-old. They are they want to fight and they want to have an issue and they want to feel special and important and angsty and listen to sad music. Okay. So when I feel that coming up, I'm like, my 16-year-old needs a little bit of care. Sometimes we'll realize, how old do I feel right now? And now we can get information about, maybe I'm doing that hyper independent thing again. Can I just go towards being independent today? Is there anything I can do to pull back a little bit or to challenge the space I'm in or to comfort that version of myself and say, hey, bud, I got this. I have this, but me having this also means we might introduce another person or two, or we might go peopling. And we have protective measures. We have ways to look out for red flags, yellow flags, gray flags, or what I call lifestyle flags, where your lifestyle may just not match up with somebody. Like, for instance, my lifestyle wouldn't match up with that of probably a flight attendant or an overnight worker. Doesn't mean anything about them. It's just a lifestyle difference. We're allowed to use our voice to say yes, no. If you need an answer now, the answer is no. I'm not comfortable sharing that yet. Thank you for listening. We're never fully accessible to anyone in that heart of hyperindependence, you know, because that hyperindependence, whoever that sits with, whether it's that 10, 12, 14, 19-year-old, they're trying to protect. So I think it's always good to think of, and instead of this as something that you're grinding against and you don't like about yourself and it's awful and it's annoying, or maybe you find a lot of familiarity in it, it's trying to be helpful. It just doesn't have access to as big of a library of information as full adult you does. That version of you that's a little more, I guess, insightful, and connected to your future values. So sometimes I think like, well, I got to get that version of me up to the current time frame because they only know what happened to them back then. So they're like, we've got to protect ourselves. And it's like, well, bud, it's about 20 years later, and I could use your help, but not that much. Not to the level that you're giving it to me. Um, so I hope those kind of metaphors and ways of thinking is useful in some way. I know they're a little odd to think about. Um, But yes, just I think the biggest thing to know is that wherever this came from for you, maybe you related to something I said, maybe you didn't, um, that it's not your fault. It's a really important thing to think about. Doesn't matter how it was created, if you like being hyper independent, if you can't stand it, if you're unsure about it, if sometimes it's annoying, sometimes it's helpful, just know there's ways. There's ways to make life a little more balanced out so we're not going, you know, over dependent on others and just kind of losing ourselves in others, but we're also not bearing the weight of the world on our shoulders because oftentimes we're doing this as people with PTSD, with trauma, with chronic illnesses, disabilities, with struggles in some way. And that doesn't mean that we can't do things, but that just means, if you've heard of spoon theory is the theory that we only have basically a drawer full of spoons a day, but everyone's spoon count is different. Now, what activity each spoon, or how many spoons it would take is different. For some people, they might have 20 spoons a day, and 4 are going to be taken up by brushing their teeth. 5 will then be taken up by showering. For someone else, that might not even be a spoon, or maybe it's 1. Um, but we tend to, if we're dealing with those difficulties, have a little less. So building a community can be really helpful. And sometimes, it'll be a lot of people like yourself. And I think that that's a really positive thing is people that have worked to build a community and also just open themselves up. Now, as I start to kind of wrap up, one thing that's been on my mind lately in relation to this is we all have empathy, whether we feel like we don't or we do, we all have access to something of the sorts. And kind of like our working memory can, for some people, hold 3 to 5 things, for other people, 5 to 7 things in our brain, some people less, some people more. We can hold space for a variety of different things in community. We can be empathetic to the struggles of certain people and then animals and then stuff in our community and stuff outside. And that doesn't mean that we have to burn ourselves out because I think sometimes people think, well, if I'm more community involved and I kind of push back on this hyper independence thing, now I'm going to have to be responsible for a bunch of people and stretching my empathy too thin. And you'll be shocked at how much room there is, in our heart to be open to experiences as long as we have those boundaries of energy, space, and time. So it's really always within our power. And I know it's probably sounds very easy for me to say. Um, Obviously, this isn't a master class and how do we set boundaries and how do we, get to know our inner child and inner self. But these things are definitely possible. So if you're hearing this right now, I encourage you to do something outside of the box. Maybe in order to work out of this, maybe you exist somewhere with the intention of maybe some sort of connection. Um, I could not recommend any more the pineapple support drop-in groups, support groups. There's some peer support places. There's literally a space called Peer Support Space. They're Orlando based, but they're virtually open to everyone in the world. That has some really good things for a variety of community experiences. Go to a body doubling space, which is kind of, co-working, a little bit of accountability. Try something maybe at your local library. They often have free classes. And me saying that doesn't mean that you're obligated to be everything for everyone there. That doesn't mean that you have to make a friend or you have to talk to anyone, but just existing within a community. Maybe there is something that you might need help with soon, now, or yesterday. See if you can find it in you to ask a clear and concise question. Um, I like the BIF acronym: brief, informative, firm, and fair. Hey, I could use your help in the coming weeks. You think you might have some time to help me with blank? Not, I'm so sorry, I'm a piece of crap. I shouldn't be asking you this. I know you have a lot on your plate. Where we disclaimer ourselves into non-existence. To see if you can just do something a little outside the box, and that may be now, that may be next month, that may be next year, but hopefully, it's something to think about. So I appreciate all of you for joining me today. I will kind of sit here for a moment or two. If anyone has any questions, chat, like I said, if you want to say something personally to me, or you want to info share with anyone else here. Q&As if you have something that you'd like to ask me and have me share with the group live. That doesn't mean that I'll share your name or anything unless you give me permission. So feel free to drop in there. Other than that, I hope that you all have received something from this, small or big. I appreciate you taking out this time. That means that you're committed to caring for yourself, and I think that's a huge thing. And I will see you all around. So be kind to yourself, and I'll just sit here on mute for a minute or two, and if I don't see anything come by, I'll see you next time.